There we go. So the intention of this little recording is just to give everybody a broader perspective of where we're going with kernel services, and then to dive into my local setup so that if you are thinking about contributing to the code base, you can do so quickly and easily as far as that is possible. In general, as I've said in previous calls, Kernel has now existed for nearly 3 years. We run all of our infrastructure using no-code tools, Typeform, Airtable, Notion, and Slack. And it has worked well for us up until this point, but it's really beginning to creak at the seams. The amount of data that we handle in Airtable and the need to maintain lots of different bases that allow different people different access rights and keep costs to a minimum. The fact that Slack is really expensive for full members, and the fact that we transport data between Airtable and Notion. We use Airtable to do all of the stuff prior to blocks in terms of processing applications. Once we've got a final block, we move that data into Notion so that people can edit their profiles and add to their adventures and do everything that is associated with kernel in the 8 weeks of your block. And then the data diverges. So what's in Notion doesn't match what's in Airtable, and then we have to go back and try and make it match. Often we don't. So we have all of these different sources of truth. So as the community grows, that becomes more and more of a problem. And it becomes a problem in many ways, both from like a manual operational efforts for the people who help run the community, as well as in terms of really important things like privacy. The more data we have in more different places, particularly in places that we don't control, the more possibility there is of bad things happening. So we have been building kernel services, and this is a family of focused web apps, which is built primarily around a non-custodial wallet, a auth service that's the wallet is used to not just sign transactions that are on-chain, but for instance, to sign JWTs sent to the auth service, which is itself a wallet. Authenticates the JWT that is signed and sent to it. And if it passes, then speaks to the storage service where all of the sensitive data that is associated with kernel fellows that we wouldn't want to put on chain is kept. And if you pass authentication, then that is sent back to you and you get logged in to the services. There is a little bit more sort of thinking around that at a technical level. For instance, the services also, in the same way that the auth service is itself a key pair and mimics how authentication works on the network or on chain, the storage service is itself just a key value store. And the reason for this is that initially, as we began thinking about these, of course, the question of identity comes up. Who are the kernel fellows and what is the schema that best represents them? And instead of having some fixed schema that makes our code brittle and that reduces people to objects within kernel, we simply just take the same approach as the blockchain does, which is that you have a number of key value pairs in the store, which are associated with you. And we can add to those merrily whatever we need as we go along. It's an append-only situation, and the code will always be backwards compatible, because if we find that we need your telephone number, which we never will, but just as an example, then we can easily add a field for telephone number. And the code is more than capable of just crawling over all the fields. You don't have to specify it. It expects this exact schema, and then if I insert a telephone number into it, everything breaks. So that's like the lowest level of these services. But on top of them is built a whole family of single-page React applications. The reason for this is multiple. We love the notion of being able to separate concerns and have one coherent environment, kernel.community, under which live every little thing that you need, which makes it easy for other communities to use our software. If they fork it, it's all open source. And if you run a community that doesn't have adventures or projects like Kernel does, you can fork the software, use exactly the same setup, but not include the adventures application. You can just customize it in a very simple and easy fashion as a result of having modularity in the code base. The choice of React is there just because React is widely spoken and it helps a lot of people contribute. We don't think that it's the best or most efficient language for doing this kind of work. Simon really wanted to work in Clojure. I've worked in Clojure before and have heard many of the reasons for doing so. Status is the biggest production app written in Clojure in the world, not just Web3. And we got great benefits from that, but also really struggled to build like a coherent and ongoing community of contributors because like the barriers to functional languages and these kinds of things are pretty high. So we chose React for this particular work. And where we want to end up is a large vision to try and explain in 5 minutes, but I will do my best, which is to say that Kernel's primary goal is learn together. Right? That is the mission that we're on. And we know that the current setup, where we have a static website with a whole bunch of content on it in Markdown documents, and then a community that gathers in Slack in this fairly ephemeral chat, doesn't always serve the needs of learning together in the most efficient manner. In particular, it's really difficult to keep up with all of the information coming through Slack all of the time. And people that go through Kernel end up feeling a little bit overwhelmed. And it's, this interesting mix of things which should be ephemeral and come up in the moment as a result of different conversations that people have or other things that are going on, versus like questions that we see over and over and over again, and that should be more kind of lasting, and there should be some more like discourse-like or Stack Overflow, like question and answer forum for these kinds of like common things that come up as we build like common knowledge as a community about certain topics that we're interested in. And then finally, the sort of like most public and long-lasting content existing in the website itself. And in order to kind of unify that entire experience and genuinely build a system that is capable of representing the collective wisdom of a group of people that is constantly changing and shifting as more people join us to learn together and others graduate out of the community and go on to their own work, where they can participate occasionally as mentors or experienced individuals in very particular domains. They are not necessarily like actively in the Slack anymore, keeping up with thousands of links that come through on a weekly basis. And we need some good way of having them remain with the tip of the chain, so to speak, without necessarily having to do full verification in the Slack themselves. So you can imagine that like we need the discourse or the Stack Exchange is like the light client. Like where do I go to see like the most important things that have been discussed in Kernel recently that aren't necessarily like directly related to the syllabus itself and like the core learning content, but like if I know what the core learning content is and I've done the course and I can go to this place, I know what people are like most discussing in the community at the moment, and like just like stay on top of it without having to like spend 5 hours clearing up my Slack. And then like if I want to like meet the latest people and get involved there and do the thing, then I can like go into the trenches, and I can slug it out in kernel think pieces or wherever it is, and try my best to keep up with whatever's going on, and run a full client in that sense. So this is really what services is trying to get us towards, right? We've been working on the wallets and the applications in these calls, but beyond that, there is like core to the like application layer of services, this notion of events, but it's currently the Convos app, convos.kernel.community. Everything that happens in kernel is an event, right? Like the block itself is an 8-week event. And then within that block, there are these guilds. Those are events. And then within the block, there are more ephemeral conversations, some of which repeat, others of which are just one of one. And then there are these in real life events, some of which are big, some of which are just a few people gathering for dinner, some of which are just a few people gathering for a picnic or any number of other things that take place. So events seem critical to how kernel works. And once we have like a good wallet that people can use that allows them to keep their data private and safe and within their control, but also to interact as far as they feel comfortable on public networks. And that allows them to like enter into these peer learning environments where they can deploy and mint and test contracts very, very easily without having to set up Git and having to understand which front end framework to use and how to move through all of this stuff before they can even touch a contract. And so we have that wallet and the events. It's very, the things that we can do with that are very powerful in terms of moving us towards like a coherent collective wisdom. Because you can take your events, anything that you do or participate in during Kernel can then be reflected easily in your adventures page, which is another one of the applications that we're building. Currently, our adventures page exists in Notion, but like your adventures page should have to do with what you do in Kernel. And if you participate in Yuntos or Convos or host your own or come to these KBK calls, or whatever it is, it like should just reflect in your adventures application. And you can see the growth over time of all of the things that you've done while you've been in Kernel, and see what others are doing and get inspiration from it and recognize how much is going on in the community. And then we can, use those adventure pages to plug in to these more sort of middle level areas, which are not just transient chats, but not quite like at the static level of like the learn track syllabus, in terms of enabling people to find the others that are really, really interesting, and not just within your block, but across blocks. So currently, the way that our Notion is set up, because of permissions in Notion, KB7 fellows can only see KB7 fellows. But the next application to talk about in the stack is the Explorer. The Explorer is the place in kernel services where you can find other fellows and other adventures based on groups that you're in, convos that you've participated in. So if I participate in a convo once with Joel and I'm like, man, that guy said something so interesting, then like it's really difficult for me to find him now and to see what he's doing in the current setup for kernel, and that prevents the easy collaboration and serendipitous collection of collective wisdom in kernel. So if I can just go into the Explorer and search Joel, or I can search the adventure that he mentioned, because I don't actually know what he said and he didn't have his name listed in the Zoom call or whatever it was, and I can find people and adventures through the Explorer that allow me to collaborate in easy and serendipitous fashion. So it's not the stewards who are out there being like, hey, Joel, have you met Ryan? He's working on like something kind of similar to what you're doing. And there's this like contrived introduction, which does like help, but it never quite feels totally organic and natural. And if you find somebody else on your own accord without like me being like, hey, guys, you two will like be friends, go and be friends, then that always like works a little bit better. And like if we can get the Explorer working well and enable this kind of like more serendipitous environments across blocks so that the community is a more continuous one, then we can create like better guidance for folks. We can create better ways of seeing what is currently going on in kernel. And the final step is then like there is also a chat applications. We have staging.chat.kernel.community. You will see it. It's very, very basic at the moment, but that is where we hope to like move over from Slack in time, as well as like ensuring that the knowledge base that we have built in Slack gets moved into something more like a forum-like space for the like slower and more asynchronous discussions that are like longer lasting than just ephemeral chat that we currently have in Slack. In addition to this, we'll be moving the website into services. If you look in the www folder, you'll find it there. We're just thinking a lot about what structure that really requires. What is the best way of representing the data currently in the website in a tree-like fashion, such that it too can like play into the integrated framework that I'm trying to lay out in front of you today. So this is isn't long-term goal like to build responsive peer learning environments. Kernel's mission, learn together. How? Responsive peer learning environments. How? Kernel services. And all of these pieces kind of go together in terms of trying to create like a coherent framework in which that collective wisdom can really flourish instead of what is currently the case, which is that it's kind of in quite a few different places. It's really difficult to orient yourself in the first few weeks. People feel overwhelmed, and then staying with the tip of the chain is really, really difficult because you have to dedicate at least kind of 6 hours a week to Slack, and that's just not available for most people. So that is the big overview. I will now take a look. This is just for you, Brad, the building kernel wisdom, because the other feature of this, which is more experimental, but I will just mention very briefly, is that we don't want to build a help center or a client service center or customer support center, these kinds of things. But having, like a wallet and this kind of stuff, it does really require us to think very deeply about how we support people in a careful fashion and make them feel less anxious about using cutting edge technology. The idea that we have, and Simon is really an expert in this, he wrote a whole book about semantic reasoning and the semantic web, is like, how do we embed knowledge from like the fora and from the website itself and other places within the services themselves. So this is like the beginning of that work, right? This document in each application, there's like a short description of what the application is. Portal is a bit of a long one because it's a lot to describe, but you'll see that like most of these applications have at most 2 paragraphs, a very short purpose, some keywords. And this will all hopefully over time be embedded in the applications themselves so that we can move towards like this more experimental aspect that I mentioned, which is the notion of conversational interfaces based on some of the old cybernetics work from Gordon Pask and those kind of influences where like the software, it shouldn't tell you what it, like it should be able to kind of tell you what it does and also to ask what you want to do. And there should be a conversation between the people and the technology that they use such that it can be established over time, like what it is that people really want to do and what it is that the software can provide. And then that can like co-evolve in interesting ways. He has some really like bigger ideas about entailment meshes and other things that I can't pretend to understand right now. But that's a key aspect of like what I mean when I say coherent collective wisdom is like, can we embed this kind of knowledge that is surfaced by community use and discussion into the places in services where it's most readily applicable, such that they can like care for the people who are coming in and provide them with the necessary sort of information and help when they need it. There's a long paper on it here, which I haven't read yet, and a link on Pask in Jam Identity, which is much shorter, and you won't have to read a 291-page PDF. That seems crazy. But I will do it at some stage. Anyway, to just finish off this quick roundup, the last thing that I wanted to do is just show my local setup so that if you are thinking about contributing, you can do so by following along here. We do have a contributing guide, which you can read, and hopefully it explains most of what you need to know in a clear and succinct fashion to get going with this stuff. But I'll just walk through visually what this is about. You can see that the repo itself is called services. I like working off my own fork because it allows me to submit pull requests that have to do with more than one file, and I can have more control over it. So I forked kernel services into my personal repositories, and I stay up to date with it by merging changes into my local branch. I've just only recently started using this GitHub feature. It's quite nice. I used to do something different, which I still have set up here, where you just add different remotes. So I have Origin is my own fork, and that's what I push to when I make any changes. And then upstream is the main repo and kernel community /services, which is a nice way. But GitHub have added this now, and it's pretty nice. And we have tried our best to make it as easy as possible to just get up and running with this stuff. So the first thing that you need to do, and everybody on this call has already done it, is open a wallet on staging.wallets.kernel.community. So if you haven't done this already, then just go ahead and create an account. As a first-time user, you can pick a nickname and a password and generate your keys. And that will be delightful. And the reason that you need to create a wallet on staging is that your local environment is linked to the staging, auth, and storage services by default in the environment variables. So your staging wallets is what you will use for local development. If you had to set up auth and storage locally, it's a lot harder to get the environment going. So instead of doing that, for local development, we just link it directly to the staging environment, and you don't need to worry about all of that stuff. You can literally clone the repo. So it's git clone, do this thing, install the dependencies, which you can just do by literally typing yarn. And then if you want to begin working on any of the packages, and I've mentioned a lot of them in this particular talk, there's www, the website, the wallets, storage does what it needs to. There are some which we haven't really touched on, reviews, proposals, and applications. You will all be familiar with applications because we've chatted about it in previous calls. Reviews are how we review applications. Proposals is how we will get to better collective decision-making that is transparent and accountable in time. And then all that I've talked about today, projects, profiles, the Explorer, chat. So if I want to start any one of these particular services, and again, the thinking here is that I ought not to need to understand all of the services. If I just want to go in and maybe add a new React module to the adventure page, because I want to be able to have richer content on my adventure page. Currently, the adventures page supports GitHub embeds and Figma files and videos and audio, but I want to have a Miro whiteboard and I need to write a little React application, a little React module. It's not even an application. Then I shouldn't need to understand everything else that's going on in services just to do that, right? I should just be able to start the adventures application. And that's what we call projects here, as I was explaining earlier. I should just be able to start that, see what's going on in the application itself, which is really simple. Each one is just create React app templates, single page application. If you've ever done create React app, you will understand what is in each of these folders, and add a very little bit to one of the views here on my probably view page as it is. And I shouldn't need to understand anything else about services just to make my adventure appear a little bit cooler. What I'm going to demonstrate now is, if I go back to the contributing file, you'll see it here. Once I've cloned the repo and installed the dependencies, yarn or yarn install, then I can very simply, using these really cool new workspace commands, I just want to start the application because we've been working on it so much. And if I've cloned the repo, installed the dependencies, then there you go. It just starts it up immediately. And the thing that you will be asked for is to log in with your kernel wallet, which is why I said the first thing you need to do is set up a wallet on staging, because this is my staging wallet that it's talking to. We're pretty particular about how long the JWTs that we sign to authenticate ourselves last. At the moment, the longest that they last is a day. I can make sure that this device is listed as secure, which Joel had some funny things to say about last week, and they're very true and spot on. But that just means that this device is listed as secure for a day. And if I've got my password right, then it works through the 100,000 hashes with which my wallet file is encrypted. And in time, it should log me into the application. we hope. There we go. And I can start working on whatever is happening here. So if I go into applications, look at the views, then, I've got each of the things going on here. And I want to look at, let's think about it. I just want to take a look at the button because we need to tell people submit now. And you can see that the change pops up immediately there because we've got live reloading. It's picking up that I am already a member because I've done the application with this particular wallet before, but hopefully this gives you a good sense of where we want the developer experience to go with this stuff. Right, are there any questions for this part of the chat?
I was just wondering, because in the GitHub, it's really useful to have everything together. Where can I put, it's a very dumb question, but where can I put maybe the related documents, like the mural board where we do all the feedback and analysis, just link in should it be in the collaborate, in the contributing file?
I think if you put it in an issue, just create a new issue and put it in there. That'll be fine for now.
You mean the reference documents of the mural?
Yeah, if you want more reference documents, then the other place to put these things is in adventures, right? If we're taking a look at the adventures, you should see kernel building kernel as one of the adventures here. And here we will need to give you, we'll need to include you in the group that has got edit permission here. But you can see all of the different links and ideas associated with kernel building kernel, and the designs that we've done for some of the stuff, the different parts of kernel building kernel and what it's all about, which I've really just brushed the surface of today. And you can find it here in staging.adventures.kernel.community, and we will make sure that you can put the Excali draw and the mirror and all of the stuff that you need in here so that we have it. And just while I'm here, I might as well show how cool this is. That again, here what we're doing is it's a markdown file, and then there's live reloading. For anybody who's it's not even live reloading, it's just live rendering on a website, right? Live reloading. And it's just, there you go, your changes are saved. And so anybody can kind of come in if you're a part of the group that has edit permissions, that has the role in our authentication server necessary to adapt storage for this particular adventure, then off you go. You can do it. There's a little schematic of what I've explained now about events being central to the rest of the stuff that then goes on in services and provides a coherent framework for the whole of services and this notion of kind of coherent collective wisdom. So I will make sure you can add to this page, Bojana, and we go from there.
I'll send you my latest wallet because I have to create it a few more times.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, create as many as you want. It's no problem just to make that happen.
Andy, I'm just reading the storage part of the document. Obviously, everything's not completely filled out. My question, what's the thinking for data, like metadata and files? Is it just a mix between off-chain and IPFS or Arweave? Like how are you, what's the thinking behind that? And I know like it's tricky when you want to keep stuff private. But
Exactly.
yeah, is it
Yeah.
IPFS, Arweave,
Yeah.
all
So
off chain to keep it private?
it's all off chain, and IPFS now we've the the thing about like using public stores, even like those kinds of ones, is that like you can encrypt the data for sure, but like can you encrypt it well enough to last 1,000 years? And my contention is no. And Simon has the same opinion. And so like the storage at the moment is done in Google Cloud. And this sounds like a strange thing to say. People are like, oh, the devil. How can you store things in Google Cloud? It's context specific, right? Like the like the use of like a cloud service here, I think is actually like really appropriate because like we control the server, and that gives us like the ability to ensure that like we are GDPR, CCPA, POPI, and all of the other data laws compliant, and give much stronger guarantees about that. Uh, and it also allows us to make sure that like should you want to come in and delete the data associated with you and your kernel adventure, which has happened for some people who have gone through, then gone on to become really successful, and just as a result of like having given real names and this kind of stuff in the beginning of kernel, want that stuff deleted, right? And if we put everything in a public store or on chain, we can't do that. So the like what we've tried to do is like the uh, the middle way, right, between all of the different options, where you can have like this non-custodial wallet, which is yours and yours alone. Nobody has access to those keys. They're generated on your device, and if you lose them, we can't help you access like your funds. But by doing this thing where like your wallet signs a JWT that talks to the auth service that then references it in the storage service, like your public key, your address is linked to a member ID in our storage service, which sits on a Google server that we control. And
Yeah.
We control it's interesting because I think Google ultimately controls it, but we run the server ourselves and are responsible for its security and for its updates and making sure that the SSL certificates and all of the things that one requires to run a good and secure service are there. And then like that public key or address talks to a member ID under which all of the data is stored. And if you lose your keys, then we can always link your member ID to a new public key. So while you lose access to your funds, we can help with community recovery of your data. Similarly speaking, if you want to delete your data or make any changes, you're the one who has responsibility and the rights to do that. Like none of the stewards in the way that the infrastructure is set up, right? We have this notion of numeric roles. So we don't have like word-based roles because they change all of the time, but numeric roles which grant different levels of access within the system. And those numeric roles, it's like the lower your number, the better, because it's not about number go up, just as like kernel fellows actually begin at the core of the community and then grow out, as opposed to most of the other imaginings of what community is. And like the lower your role, then like the more actions you can take. So for instance, we would have to lower Boyana's role in order to later edit the KBK adventure there. And at like, I think a level of 100 or below, you're a steward. And that allows you to edit the public address field associated with member IDs, but nothing else. Only the public key associated with that member ID can change the data. So like this
Yeah, that's smart. One suggestion or something to potentially think about is if kind of the high level meta tags were on something like an IPFS or Arweave that basically talks to the Google Cloud, then you could have kind of I don't want to call it a standard, but a protocol that could work for kernel. But when other people were to build on top of it, then obviously they could connect their own Google Clouds, but still kind of have like this high level meta tag standard,
sure.
just for like contextualization and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yes. I'm not the best person to talk on this. Simon is, because like this is the reason that we use like a commonly accepted web standard of like JSON web tokens, because like it's very easy for other people to authenticate against the kernel service too, right? And so like if you want to like go and log into Wonderverse with your kernel wallet, you should be able to do that very, very easily. And I think that we can achieve most of what you're talking about simply with like the current setup, and that's why like again JSON Web Tokens and just like best practices and web standards for this without like going, like burning it all down. Because like it does allow for interesting like federated options and these kinds of things. And if you read the engineering manifesto, you'll see at the bottom a very short section on federation that's very clear. And the other thing is that yes, like I will rush through this, but very briefly, like one of the things that we had to think about for the wallets was in order to run a wallet, you need to index transactions on chain, which is notoriously difficult to do because data is not structured on Ethereum in a very coherent or legible fashion. And so you need to like pull all the transactions, index them in a way which is queryable and crawlable in an efficient manner, and then like serve them to like our wallet front end. We initially started doing that with a GitHub repo because you can use Git in really cool ways to do that. But like there's a 100 gig limit on Git repos, and Microsoft was not interested in helping us provide a genuine public service. And so the next option there is to have all the code by which we index the chain in a public Git repo, but put it in Arweave. So I think that like that's where we'll start working with Arweave. In terms of like providing like just a public index that makes it unnecessary to use services like Infura or Alchemy and these kinds of like black box providers. And then hopefully we learn enough out of that we can like figure out, hey, is it because Arweave has a tagging system, as you well know, right? And so like, can we use those tags in a manner which is like privacy preserving, but enables greater agency for people that have interacted with kernel and allows them to do more stuff in a more like personalized and contextual way, then hell yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much.